In my writing and in my teaching, I talk a lot about relationships and conversations, and specifically in terms of how I think relationships and conversations go hand in hand. They each influence the other, they each limit the other, they each create the possibilities with the other. So by relationships, I mean very simply being in a relationship with another person, but a particular kind of relationship in the sense that the quality of the relationship is more of a witness. We are in there together, looking at this, doing this, trying to figure it out together, rather than one person telling another person how it should be or how they should do it. And in terms of conversations, I think in terms of conversations that are more what I call conversations with, talking with, being with, responding with another person, thinking with another person, as opposed to talking to them for or about them. So relationships and conversations go hand in hand, and it's almost like relational conversations might be a hyphenated term, that they're really not separate. I don't see them as standing alone. I think maybe one way of explaining it would be, I think in terms of the way that we begin to meet and greet another person begins to set the tone, begins to signal a particular attitude for the way we're going to be able to be in relationship and conversation with each other. So I want to meet and greet people in a way that shows that I am welcoming of them, that I am appreciative of their presence, and that my words and my actions, my eyes, my gestures will signal that I value them, I respect them, I think what they have to say is important. And when I say what they have to say is important and that I appreciate that and value it, doesn't mean that I necessarily agree with it or condone it or will leave the room supporting it. It just means that I value that they have their own opinion, perhaps a different opinion, perhaps the same opinion that I have, but it's their opinion. I'm really interested in learning how they would further articulate or describe that opinion. So that's part of being curious, is making comments, is asking questions that invites the other person to continue to talk and clarify and expand what they're talking about. The attitude in which I pose my questions or my comments is very important, as well as the tone of it, because I do not want a person that I'm speaking with to think that I am being judgmental or that I am blaming them in any way for anything that they are saying or doing. But I want them to really think that I am sincerely interested. Now, I once had a conversation with a therapist and a mother and her 10-year-old daughter, and the conversation came around to their work together and how it was, and the mother and the daughter's experience of the therapy and of the therapist. And it was really interesting because kind of in the middle of the conversation, this little 10-year-old girl was sitting there on the edge of her chair going like this, signaling, I have something I want to say, or at least that's how I interpret it. So I said, it looks like you have something you want to say. And she said, yes. You and my mother were just talking about how the therapist, whose name was Judy, how Judy listens. And she says she does listen, this little 10-year-old. And I said, oh, how do you know that she listens? And she said, because she asks me questions about what I'm talking about. So to her, that meant that Judy was listening, heard her, and was interesting because she was asking questions to learn more about what she was saying. Particularly with children, it's so often to discount them and not include their voices, as well as someone else that maybe you don't have value for or appreciate what they can bring to a relationship or to a conversation.
Yes.
Okay, now I'm imagining that some people listening to my talking are wondering, okay, so maybe this works in your professional life, Harlene, but what about us in our everyday life, in our family, with how I am with my children, how I am with my partner? And I find that it has equal value in terms of being able to move forward, begin to create futures with each other, so to speak, in a way that works for everyone. I do think, however, I'll be honest in saying this, that it is much more difficult to have this particular kind of attitude and tone and interest and curiosity with someone that you think you know. And that's really important. I think I should add might. With someone you think you might know. Because we're always making assumptions about the other people in our lives, and particularly people that we know well, where we just think we can anticipate what they're thinking, what they're going to say next, what they're going to do next. So we get kind of on a speed train. And I find it really good just to kind of slow down, sit back, take a deep breath, and okay, so how can I approach this in a way that signals to the other person that the other person experiences that I'm not judging them, I'm not blaming them. And again, I cannot underscore how difficult this is often to do with people that we know well. Part of what I'm saying is that we think we know the other person, and therefore we're making assumptions about them. We have become experts in interpreting their behavior, interpreting their words. And so we're placing our words, our interpretations, our descriptions on them as a person, and as well as what they say and their behaviors. And sometimes people do ask, well, how can you not do that? And that's a very, very important question. I think, first of all, we have to be aware of how much we do that and when we do that. In other words, when we take the bait, so to speak. So let's say, for example, that I'm going to take a partnership of a man and a woman, a very traditional view of this, okay? So let's say that the woman has been at work, is home, already getting the children settled after school, preparing dinner. The husband comes in, he's had a very difficult day, and he just starts talking. And then all of a sudden the wife starts, rattling the dishes, and he doesn't think she's listening to him, or she starts giving advice. She's heard this story over and over again about the conflict with his boss, and so she starts giving advice. Well, you should have. Well, oh, I know exactly what you did this time. You did it again. And he doesn't think she appreciates his experience. He certainly doesn't appreciate her advice. Now, what he brought to that, in my opinion, is a failure to say why he was sharing her. One of the things I'm thinking about in terms of kind of being prepared for inviting someone else to talk with you, or wondering if they might even want to talk with you, is I think of it as a very simplistic way of having good manners. I'd really like to talk with you about something that happened at work today, but I know you've had a long day too, so would this be a good time, or would another time be okay? You really want to talk about this with me? I mean, I've been talking with you about this, numerous times about what happened at work, and it's kind of, I hate to tell you this, but it's kind of the same thing. But so it's as a colleague of mine has said, it's like asking permission. Asking permission is part of the preparing for the conversation that you hope to have, although you can't predict the conversation that you will have. So some of you might be thinking, well, are you saying that this is kind of a two-way street, that people are doing this together? And I would say, yes, exactly. What I'm suggesting, though, is the person that initiates the conversation prepares for the conversation by saying why they want to have the conversation and what they want from the conversation. And I'm not saying that you have to think in terms of answering these kinds of questions and coming up with sort of a written thing before you invite someone to talk with you or to help you with something. But you do need to give someone a clue as to why you want to talk about this. And do you want help from them? How can they be helpful? And it takes kind of a mindset shift. It also takes, as I said a moment ago, of being able to really pause, step back, and relax for a moment, and just take, even if it's 7 seconds, time to prepare how you want to respond to what you're being asked of or for. Yeah, you can think of it as slow it down. Think about putting it in slow motion. And sometimes it takes practice. And thinking of practice, it's often much more successful and much more less challenging and difficult to practice when the stakes aren't high. When it's not another big blow up with one's boss that you think you might get fired unless you can really solve this or retreat in some way. But practice. So it's like practice on small things. Even if it's something like, I was thinking about it would be nice to go to dinner tonight. How to have that kind of conversation. How many times have I heard parents say, well, my son gets in the car when I pick him up from school and I say, how was your day? And he says, oh, okay. Well, tell me what you did. Oh, nothing, all the same stuff. Those kinds of questions don't engage children. So how do you engage children in conversations? How do you take time to think about, what can I ask about his day? Rather than asking your child, how was school today? What did you have at lunch today? A friend of mine once said that he would always ask his child, who got in trouble at school today? Not did you get in trouble at school today, but who got in trouble at school today? And that it would just opened up everything, and the child just started talking about whatever had happened at school, and this would be an example of an uncertain question, an uncertain curiosity that in a way could catch someone else off guard, but in the situation that I just described, and I think a lot of times a person may pause for a moment, wonder what's going on, but they engage in it. Mm-hmm. When you think of practicing responding with the person in a different way than perhaps you've been doing, there is some uncertainty in that. You don't quite know how it's going to play out. So that's why I say practice on small things. And the uncertainty is part of being able to let go of what you're expecting, what you think you know about the other person, how you think you know ahead of time exactly how this scenario played out, using this previous example of the husband at work with the boss. You've seen this movie over and over and over again. You know the next scene, you know the next line. And that gets us into trouble because we become too certain. And when you're too certain, you end up handicapping yourself. Wait, erase that. That's not a good word. You end up placing yourself in a prison. And you don't have any room to maneuver. And you're most likely to have a lot of difficulty being able to have any kind of new thoughts, creative thoughts, particularly in terms of being able to view or see or experience the person sitting across from you differently. And I had a colleague once who said, we create the people sitting across from us with the descriptions that we have of them. And so if you are certain that this person is like this, and you have this description that you've placed on them, and you're really married to that description because you know that your description is really accurate, that's really true, that's really what happened. You put yourself in a corner, or a little prison. You don't have any room to maneuver, to do anything, or think differently. And it's like, how can you... One way of thinking about it is, particularly with people that you think you don't like, or you know you don't like, it's like, how can you play a little game with yourself when you're not with them? How can you think of, what is there about them that perhaps I do like? Is there something about them that I value, something about them that I respect? Now, I'm not saying that then you have this happy honeymoon of a relationship, whether that's with a child, a partner, or your boss at work, or your thesis advisor, whomever it may be. It's not to say that it will then be a perfect relationship, because that's not life. Life is uncertain. We don't know what's going to happen next. We like to be able to predict what will happen next, and we hope our predictions come true. if they're good predictions. But we can't predict what happens next. We're human beings, and we often respond in the moment. Not only us, but the people that we're in relationship with respond in the moment. When we're really certain about another person, we are often just sort of doing our same old habits over and over again in terms of the way that we respond with them. And I think thinking of habits is a really good way to think about it. And what I often suggest to people is try not to erase a bad habit or an old habit that you want to get rid of, but try to develop a new habit that will eventually take over its place, kind of like a new weed in a garden that's just going to take over. Because I think it's less challenging, less difficult to develop a new habit than to get rid of an old habit on purpose. Yeah. I think in most of our cultures, particularly Western cultures, I will signal out, we're very uncomfortable with uncertainty because we want things to be predictable. And certain things have to be predictable. Like the bus is going to come, the traffic light's going to turn green, and then it's going to turn yellow, and then it's going to turn red, and the walk sign or the don't walk signs are going to come on. Some things we do want to know operate in that way, but human relationships don't seem to operate in that way, in my experience, and the people that I meet and talk with. But one of the things that really throws people off is uncertainty. And I think a lot of the request for certainty, a lot of the uncomfortableness with uncertainty is in our own immediate and local cultures. In other words, that we aren't born to be uncertain, but I think that in many ways we learn to be uncertain depending on what the cultural rituals. And some people want to know, okay, so how can I not always want to be so certain? How can I be not so discomforted by uncertainty? And I always believe not only in practicing, but practicing in small ways. So I'm thinking of something like, just think of how you usually organize your day. Let's say how you usually getting organized for the day, whether that's being organized to be at home for the day, to be in the front of a classroom for the day, to be behind a desk at work. How can you experiment with just adjusting something, doing it a little bit different? And it sounds maybe insignificant, but it's like, I think that if you practice in small steps, you begin to gain some confidence, you begin to gain some certainty. And I'm remembering one time some years ago at the institute where I work in Houston, Texas, there was a psychiatrist from Nicaragua. And he was very unsettled by this notion of uncertainty. And particularly in terms of his profession, that when a patient comes to you, they want certainty. They want to know what the diagnosis is. They want a pill. They want a medication, whatever it is. But they want you to be the expert, to be the doctor. And he just could not grasp that. And one day he just came in, and I would say kind of swaggering, and he was just smiling, even more so than he usually did. And I said, his name was Emilio, and he wouldn't mind my using his name. And I said, Emilio, what's going on? You just look so happy this morning. What happened last night? Did you have a big party or something? He said, no. He said, I woke up this morning and I decided that I'm comfortable with uncertainty. And I said, you're comfortable with uncertainty? How did that happen? He says, I don't know, but I just decided that uncertainty has a sense of certainty in it. In other words, how can I put words to his words? That he felt confident, he felt assured that he would be able to handle whatever was going to happen next.